One of the major complaints is therapists not having structure for them. People want to have a map and they want to know are we doing well? Are we not doing well?
And I think we've got to be willing to be uncomfortable. I think, comfort in a way is one of the things that scares me the most about what some people aim for in marriage.
Marriages, I always believe, change unilaterally, not bilaterally. It only takes one person who boldly changes the way they're interacting in that marriage to change the marriage. You change by being a part of a community that sets that standard, but also helps you carry the load for the change.
What if I told you there are 3 distinctly different paths people take after experiencing the trauma of betrayal? Curious which one you're on? Wayward or betrayed, the shame and pain from an affair or an addiction can make us feel like our feet are forever stuck in quicksand. But are we really as stuck as we often feel? Today, I get to sit with 2 of our infidelity experts, our founder, Rick Reynolds, and also one of our expert therapists, John Haney, who is co-author of our Harboring Hope course. They will explain what these paths are, where they come from, and share their experiences with them. This is all to help you figure out which one you might be on. By understanding the path set before you, you'll discover how you can move forward by taking the most ideal steps to heal and recover. Let's talk about the very first path, the sufferer. What does this tend to look like?
Misery, victimhood, just being absolutely stuck. I guess a image that comes to mind for me, in 2014, I went over to Belgium and France. I'm a history buff, so I was kind of celebrating the centennial of World War I and wanted to walk some old trench lines. And I was in a little Belgian village of Ypres, and every night, 100 years past the war, every single night, come rain or shine, they have what they call the last call, where a guy comes out with a bugle and they lay a wreath on the tomb of the unknown soldier there as a way of just kind of honoring the dead. But when I was there looking at that, I remember thinking, this is a lot of what our people look like. They just get stuck here. And in essence, night after night, week after week, year after year, Rick and I see people, sometimes decades removed from the incident. And every night they're still like laying dead flowers on a tomb, basically.
And then the fact is, there are people who are afraid to heal, because if they begin to heal, they're afraid it's going to make what was a horrible act that was committed against them look like a minor paper cut. So they would rather stay stuck, I think, and continue to process it rather than wanting to take the risk of finding something new. And they are stuck because they literally want their mate, I think sometimes, to continue to suffer. Now, it's not just the betrayed spouse. There's also, it happens on the other side with the wayward spouse, where they're just also just as stubborn. And honestly, I don't know about you, John, I think these couples would probably have been just as miserable without the affair.
Yeah, I do agree.
Because they don't know how to relate and how to forgive themselves or others.
Right, which will, put you in a state of perpetual misery. And so often we encounter people who really, for being stuck or whatever choice they're making, really don't want to heal.
It reminds me a little bit of a lady in my office once. We were working on a trauma memory where she was trying to drive to a different part of town, and she stopped and she said, "I don't know if I want to get better." And I went, "What?" And she said, "Well, I'm afraid if I'm able to get better that it'll mean that maybe what he did wasn't that big a deal."
Right.
Right? And I just said, "Honey, look, if you're able to get over this, you're a total badass. It's not that it's a little deal, it's huge."
I totally agree. And I think that's a big, big problem we see again and again. It's like people feel like somehow they're dishonoring their own pain by getting over it. If I don't make a monument to it and lay those dead flowers on it, like I'm somehow just dishonoring myself. But I think the choice to transcend that is so much bigger.
Yeah, there was a lady today, in fact, she said, "This is just something I can't get over." And I said, whoa, time out. I said, let's be honest here. I said, I know far too many people who've been able to get over it, so at least tell yourself the truth. This is just something you choose not to get over. And as long as you're saying that, I'm fine. But I don't want to hear you say you can't get over it, because I know you can get over it.
Totally.
On that note, do you find that it's hard for sufferers to admit that that's where they are?
In some cases, I think, we talk about the problem of actually kind of owning or accepting your own reality is a way that kind of keeps people stuck. I think people put all manner of different ways to try to sell it to themselves and tell themselves that they're not stuck, but in essence to keep themselves stuck.
They're stuck in not even being able to forgive themselves. And they certainly can't transition to something new because at one level, they're just mad that this is their life. And they did not sign up for this, and it's just not fair. And as long as they stay in that it ain't fair mode, they're not going to move forward.
There's some strategic advantages to victimhood. And I'm saying this from autobiographical experience. I went through my victim phase with all of this. And yeah, I mean, it's a nice way to feel sorry for yourself, to make everything make sense. You know, if the world's done me wrong, I don't really have to take a whole lot of responsibility for anything. I just have to kind of sit back and I would wear that like a security blanket sometimes, just being able to do the woe is me kind of thing, because there was a perverse kind of comfort in that.
Yeah, I was thinking of a Brene Brown quote today, and I'm not going to butcher it. I don't remember it exactly, but it's like, when you're able to share your deepest pain or your deepest shame in a group and receive compassion in return, deep compassion, that's what begins to transform how you see yourself. Because you've got to move from seeing yourself as the victim as to somebody who can change and who actually can have a better life. But it's hard to believe.
And I think that's one of the real keys there, that, like, you know, in that making that choice to change. I mean, I think there's a couple of things. First, we have to accept and look at what are the inherent kind of benefits in not changing, you know, because a lot of people like the strategic advantage. They like the leverage it gives them with their partners in any argument. They like, you know, kind of seeing their partner wallow in shame as a way of continuing to punish them. So sort of accepting the strategic advantages they're getting out of not changing, but daring to kind of claim their own agency with this. Sometimes we put way too much emphasis on what our partner is doing or not doing, that I can't heal until he or she gets their act together, and we just kind of stay in autopilot then.
Now, there's a Viktor Frankl quote. Again, I'm going to butcher the quote here, but it's something like, the problem is if you look for what life is supposed to be giving you, you'll have a problem. You need to be really exploring what you need to be giving life. And it's a total shift in what you're about. Either you're going to be giving or you're going to be mad because you aren't receiving what you want.
Do both spouses need to opt for change, choosing a different path, or can just one spouse create that change?
Marriages, I always believe, change unilaterally, not bilaterally. It takes two people agreeing to do the same dance to keep a marriage the same. It only takes one person who boldly changes the way they're interacting that marriage to change the marriage, because the other person has to shift with them at that point. So it doesn't take two people changing. Now, the two people may not stay together. If one keeps moving toward health and the other one chooses not to, you know, that relationship may not make it, but it'll change.
Yep. It's kind of like if we've both been doing the tango forever and one of us suddenly starts doing the polka, you know, if the choreography changes, the dance changes, and everything kind of structurally falls apart. And so, yeah, we can heal whether, again, our partner chooses to or not, you know, so the relational healing may depend on what our partner's doing, but like our own individual healing, you know, we get to take responsibility for that.
That totally makes sense. And John, you alluded to this just a couple of moments ago, but when people want to stay stuck, like, what are the reasons that they're choosing to do so?
Again, there's kind of some strategic advantages for it for some people, that, like, you know, some people like having the moral upper hand in the marriage all the time, that no matter what my partner throws at me, I can kind of put down when I call the nuclear trump card and says, well, you cheated on me, boom, so argument over or whatever. But I think, you know, from a existential psychology perspective, it's almost a way of avoiding responsibility for our own life, our own outcomes, and everything. That, like, if I can kind of accept this script that has been handed to me about kind of like life and my partner, and God even has kind of dealt me the shorthand, I can define my whole life by that, and it becomes an external kind of factor, not an internal factor, that someone else did me wrong. It's not anything that I'm particularly responsible for. And it's a way of just kind of avoiding responsibility in a sense. And I know, not to get too far off the topic, but that ties in, I think, to the locus of control thing too, that like a lot of people will have kind of a strong external locus and a strong internal locus others will have. And what that means is it's how we kind of frame our lives based on the things that happen to us and how much agency we take or we don't take, how much we just kind of surrender to the outside world. Like two kids can get the same D on a test, and a kid with a strong internal sense of agency is going to say, well, I don't like that, I'm going to work harder. They study really hard for the next test and they get a B or an A. The other kid who's got a strong external locus, who believes that like I'm just at the mercy of whatever's happening to me, is going to, basically just say, well, this class is too hard, I'm dumb, I might as well not try anymore, and they just give up, And so I think there's some internal things with us too that keep us from really healing. And I think that can be addressed too if we can just dare to address some of that. If I've always kind of been someone who's likely to kind of just bend with the circumstances or give in to difficult situations, I can look at changing that. But again, that choice becomes
Yeah, and I think one other contributing factor is potentially developmental trauma, or at least how you grew up. If you had a parent and that's what they were modeling and they never modeled the ability to do it different, it's really hard to break out of that pattern. It's almost like that imprinting that occurred from that parent can almost keep you stuck because you keep repeating generationally that pattern. And it can be broken, but I do think that's the source of it also, is if that's what was always modeled, it's like you don't even know another alternative.
It's like that old experiment where they put the glass in a goldfish tank, and the fish was restricted to swimming in one small area, and then got so used to that when they finally removed the glass, the fish never leave that area.
Right.
Left that
they
area.
Stay right there.
How can one spouse encourage the other spouse to choose a different path without seeming like they're trying to rush them through recovery or belittle them? When I think about this, I'm very, very grateful that my husband did not do this. Like, he, early into our recovery, did not have the attitude of like, well, I see you're camping out in Sufferland. You should really choose another path. Why don't you look over here at this one? This would be so much better for us. Like, I can't imagine having been rushed through this.
I've got, a lifetime's worth of issues that I could be looking at myself. And instead of trying to fix my partner, yes, we want to be able to mirror to one another and give constructive feedback to one another. But if my self-defined role is to fix my partner, I think I'm looking from the wrong perspective. I think I need to look at fixing me first, mind my side of the street, and hopefully, trying to give some loving support to my partner, who's hopefully trying to to manage her side of the street, and then trying to come together in the middle of that street. But I think it starts with me instead of them.
And I think that it has to be, as for me, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to love you. It's not that I'm abandoning you, but I'm going to choose health. I hope you also choose health, but I'm going to support you in whatever way I can support you. I'm not going to tell you, you need to follow me, but hopefully I can at least set an example of what health looks like.
What is the second path? Please, who wants to tell us about what it is to be a builder?
The builder is interesting. They are darn committed to ultimately making sure this relationship works. They're committed to their commitment. And it can be for lots of different reasons. I was probably initially somewhat of a builder because I didn't even feel like certain things like divorce was an option. I wouldn't even consider. I'm not saying that I wanted to get divorced, but it wasn't even optional. And I don't know what would have happened if Stephanie hadn't been growing. I think I would have still been the builder, trying to keep the family together. I would be doing it for the sake of the kids. I would try to be following my moral standards, and not that that's a bad thing, but I would probably be more of a human doing than a human being. I don't know
following
that
it for the wrong reason.
Yeah, I'm doing the right thing for the wrong reason.
The visual I have for this is literally trying to hide an elephant under the rug. Like, they're there, they're in the room, and we're just like, can I fit this elephant under the rug so we can just go about our life?
Yeah, and the elaborate mechanisms people use to flatten that elephant, Yeah, the builder one really concerns me kind of as a therapist because it looks really good on the surface. It can really feel like we're doing something incredibly noble, and there can be aspects or kind of facets of it that are noble, but we're trying to like recapture a status quo that maybe wasn't so great to begin with.
Absolutely.
My experience anyway, it seems like there's a human attribute to kind of go back to, what's the old Barbra Streisand song, The Way We Were, right? Like we're trying to recapture some idealized state from whether that was what the world was like in our childhood or what we thought our marriage was like or kind of what it represented to us. And we conveniently forget a lot of the ugly and horrid stuff. We just kind of paint this kind of image of the way it was and try to recapture that. And if we can just kind of go back to the illusion of that, we feel like we've arrived in a sense, but we've just stuck in the same old status quo, broken, same difficult issues marriage.
And it's so strange to me how when you're going through that, you'll forget the negative. It's almost like the way you punish the other person sometimes is by telling them how great it was and how wonderful it was and that, you just destroyed nirvana. And there is nothing farther from the truth.
Right.
That marriage wasn't perfect. None of them are. And they actually have a chance to renegotiate, to rebuild something better than before. One of the things I always say at the beginning of EMS weekend is that if all you accomplish is saving your marriage and going back to where you once were, we'll feel like a failure. This is an opportunity to rebuild life. As he used this as a catalyst for not only healing, but transformation so that you can have something much better than you had before. And you can be much better than you were before.
Totally. And I think it's another really easy trap to fall into that. And I fell into this one too. I mean, I remember, in the devastation after going through the betrayal trauma and everything, I remember hearing that song Yesterday by the Beatles where he says, I'm not half the man I used to be. And I felt like that. It really felt like I was diminished as a human being and all of that, and was really working to try to get that half of me back. But what I came to realize is I never was the man I thought I was in the first place, that like the man I was trying to live was kind of an incomplete man, was a kind of an ego-based idea of who I was, who I wanted to present to everybody else. And I got to the point where I realized I don't ever want to go back to that facade of a man that I really was. I want to actually become something of substance and actually grow fully into the real me. And I think the complacency of the pretend normal keeps us from doing just that, becoming what we're really supposed to be.
I was watching a documentary last night on the Bee Gees, and what was astounding about that group, by the way, they're the fourth highest selling group of all time.
Are they really? The
Yes,
Bee Gees? Yeah.
Fourth, yeah. Behind the Beatles, ABBA, Queen, and then the Bee Gees. But the thing that was amazing, and I think all great groups are able to do this, is they continually remade themselves through the decades. They were never the same. And it was their ability to remake themselves each time that kept them moving forward. And I think oftentimes with recovery, this is an opportunity to sing a different song, to sing a better song, to remake. But if in your mind you've got this archetype of what that marriage is supposed to look like, and you're trying to recapture whatever that illusion was, which you probably weren't even looking at it realistically anyway, because now the fantasy of that has just been shattered. I don't know that you want to go back and recreate that fantasy.
Absolutely.
I personally loved the idea of being handed a do-over because I felt very miserable in my pre-D-Day life. So I happily took the do-over and ran with it. But why do some people, what makes people tend towards the path of being a rebuilder?
The first word that pops into my head is legalism. It's in your mind, it's the way it's supposed to be,
yes.
And that's what you're supposed to do. And you've got to stay within the lines. I actually call it paint by number. Some people are dynamic in their relationship and they can flow and go back and forth, but some people, they learn to do relationship by role or paint by number. And as long as they're staying within the lines and doing it the way they were taught they were supposed to do it, they feel like they have a successful relationship. But paint by number, I guess it may be art, but it's not real art because it's not creative. It's just following the lines.
See, I really like that description because I think in a sense it is kind of playing to the archetype of what I think, relationships supposed to look like. I mean, and I remember that too, kind of growing up thinking, that it's going to go to college, is going to meet the right girl, going to have 2.6 children or whatever I was supposed to have, and get the right job, and everything was just going to kind of fall into place. And, those are all nice things, but in and of themselves that they're not going to deliver the real goods, that ultimately we have to look beyond just kind of the facade or the shell of what a good marriage is supposed to look like and actually get into the nitty gritty beneath it.
Yeah, because to me, if you think that living in the right house, driving the right car, will ultimately be the thing that makes you happy, I've got some really bad news for you.
Right.
I mean, there's a hedonic set point. We'll always go back to the same level of misery or happiness we're always at, regardless of when we get it back. It's still going to be the same mediocre experience we were having prior to. We just forgot all the mediocre part.
What comes up for me too with the rebuilder is just wanting to rush through the pain, that it's just so painful that we're like, I don't want to deal with this. Let's just go back to how it was. I forgive you. Let's move on.
Oh, I think that's a great point, Candace. It's a great way to just kind of avoid our reality, that if I can just kind of at least go back to the pretend normal, the play acting of what, engaged marriage looks like, then maybe it'll trickle down to actually feeling like that. But doesn't work so well.
Well, it makes me think of a couple I saw last week also, where I've been really proud of the work she's been doing at trying to become a new person. I mean, she's really been stretching herself. And so we sit down at our couples session, and I said, so how's the state of the union? How are y'all doing? And he said, I am really disappointed. And I'm like, what? And he said, I've been looking for a marriage that's so much better than before, and we don't have it yet. And I want more. And I went, well, that makes me feel like a failure. Okay, I thought we were doing great. But what I love about the guy is he's not going to settle for going back to where they once were. He wants something better. And I think, he was able to see, I think, the change that his mates made. But, it's really funny as couples are rebuilding, the person who's really been off base, like she had been, they know in their head how different they're being. But it may not always look like there's a big difference from the other person's perspective, especially if they were really good at playing the role of the happy spouse. And he's saying, we want something more, and they'll get there.
You bet. And Candace, I think one of the real challenges too, and this is one of the things that, from a psychological perspective, has always kind of concerned me, is that the human ego tends to be resistant to change. It the ego part of our makeup
Right.
likes familiarity, even if that familiar isn't particularly working for us. We like to go back to things to be predictable. We like the way things were kind of set up and arranged. And again, even when it's not particularly working for us. And so a lot of this, I think, is a way of kind of crucifying the ego in a sense, to let the true self fully emerge. But to do that, we have to be willing to shake things up. And yet human beings have a really sad tendency to go back to, what's predictable, even when it's not so great. Say this at one of the EMS talks, but, when the Israelites were fleeing captivity, finally they had broken the bondage of slavery, but a few nights in the desert, and they're like, wow, I miss having a roof over my head and regular meals and everything. And they're ready to go back just because the newness of it was too uncomfortable. And I think we've got to be willing to be uncomfortable. I think, comfort in a way is one of the things that scares me the most about what some people aim for in marriage. And I think builders often aim for exactly that.
Before we shift off of the builder, just some final words on why does being a builder not work out well?
You can end up at the end of life having done everything right and be asking yourself, is that all there is? Was that it? You feel dead. And it can create a real existential crisis at some point, because you've done it all perfect. You've done the right thing, and yet it feels not alive, it feels dead.
Alexander the Great was said to have started weeping when he ran out of worlds to conquer, because he was set up to be a conqueror, and that's what he did. And so he was playing to the role of what he was supposed to be doing. And when that role was used up, he didn't know who he was, and I think to me that's a big part of it, that like if we're playing to what we're supposed to do, we don't ever really get to do what we were meant to do or what we want to do. We're playing a role instead of really living.
With the rebuilder too, it just makes me think like my vision for this is that people are, because they're sweeping it under the rug, trying to move through it very quickly, that they're missing out on the light on the other side of moving through it, because they're not actually going through the process. It's my understanding of moving through it. They're just kind of like, it's okay, we can put this behind us. You don't get to that light on the other side. It's still there. Everything that you're dealing with is actually still there.
You bet. And it's like, and there's a whole nother world that's out there just waiting to be discovered and claimed. It's kind of like the prison gate is open, but we're still choosing to live in the cell because it's what we know.
It's interesting in the happiness studies, what really causes us to be able to maintain a higher level of happiness. Now, we all have genetically a hedonic set point. I mean, you're either born genetically seeing the glass half empty or half full. That's 50% of happiness. However, people who take risk in life, not who settle for routine, but who are willing to stretch themselves, those are the ones that are able to hold happiness at a much higher level.
As we move on to our third path, please tell us about what it means to be an explorer. This is my favorite part of the Choose Your Own Adventure.
To become an explorer is to fully become human. It's to transcend the circumstances. The word I like very often is the word homecoming. It's a return to self. And this is a painful way to get there, but I think it's a pretty effective way to get there. One thing I sometimes say to my small groups at EMS is sometimes it really takes something pretty radical. It takes a pretty big brick wall that we hit in life for us to ever really have a chance of shaking us free from the complacency that we were in. Life and our ego has to be deconstructed enough sometimes. And so I buy into that philosophical idea that like we have to suffer at least one major failure, one major humiliation, for some of us multiple, before we're ever going to really get it through our thick heads that like this isn't working, and to do something differently, to see the world in a different way.
And I do think the term suffering is apt. Suffering is a huge piece of motivating us to try to change and to also figure out that the way we've been doing it, we're not happy with it. We're not happy with ourselves. We're not happy with them. We're not happy with the relationship. And we want something different. We want to grow.
If you could describe an explorer, what would they look like?
Not to sound too much like Mr. Rogers or something, but like an explorer is someone who's really discovered love for their neighbors, love for themselves. They're engaged in community now in a way they've never been. They're fully alive. They're self-aware, but there's a kind of humility that I think a real explorer has, that and that was a strange thing that I saw not only with myself, but all of my friends and colleagues at AR, that that they've all been through this really difficult experience, and yet their capacity to love and their compassion actually increased, not decreased from it, which, you might expect the decreasing from someone stuck at that suffering kind of stage or something. It really kind of like unfolds who we are and makes us more aware and loving human beings.
The mission statement we have, Candace, to help those, impacted by infidelity to find new lives of meaning and purpose. Ultimately, explorers are looking for new meaning and purpose. They find a different reason to do life. And to me, that is, totally at the center of it, where they find something even better, more motivating, more life-giving for them. And they're giving to life. They're not just expecting life to give to them.
And they never stop growing. I think that's a part of an explorer too. That's like, whereas a builder might just kind of hit a plateau and then desperately try to camp there, even though the wind's trying to blow them off. They'll just kind of put the tent stakes down and stay there forever. There's a constant kind of evolving, I think, that goes with an explorer, that like we're just always trying to grow, always, more fully becoming that which we always were, kind of thing.
Yeah, they're kind of discouraging to be around because a lot of times they make you feel bad about yourself because you just read what you just did. What? Are you serious? Oh man, I feel like such a wuss.
But I think with that, there's a kind of peace about an explorer. They're and had the pleasure of working with some explorers who are like at the end of their life journey and everything, or at least this part of their journey and of this life, and they were completely at peace with the world. They weren't holding resentments. They weren't, still griping about something that happened decades ago. They were at peace, and I think there's a peace that comes with an explorer because we've needed to go through the necessary forgiving and grieving and all the stages to get to that explorer kind of stage. But but we don't have to hold old resentments anymore.
I'm trying to think if this is true or not, so you can judge it. But also, when I see explorers, they're not self-consumed. Very much, they are involved in the lives of other people. They are embedded in community. They take the risk to share and be vulnerable in community, but they give to others and try to that generativity that Erickson talks about.
Yeah,
that
Rick,
whole
I
stage.
could not agree more because I think, and ironically, you've seen those studies even done on human misery and everything, and the single greatest variable contributing to human misery is self-centeredness. A lot of the ways that we pursue, if I just indulge myself enough, give myself enough material possessions, that I'll find that. I think an explorer and someone who's just really living a meaningful, happy existence is someone who's discovered that very secret that it's in giving that I most fully receive. And they live their life that way. They almost kind of live from a servant's heart kind of perspective. And the more they give, the more it unlocks a greater store of their ability to give. I think it's like this kind of cornucopia of, but I could not agree with that more, that I think that community aspect of the explorer, not being too alone with themselves. And I know that's a trap for anyone dealing with betrayal trauma that, are on the other side of this too, that like we can get so fixated on our own pain that we almost kind of wrap ourselves in this narcissistic bubble. That's all we see is me,
Well, and shame naturally causes us to want to isolate, but the growth will never come until you're embedded back and you're willing to face the fear of truly being known and what's happened and finding out that you're not alone. I mean, people also have gone through things. You're not the only one.
I love the pronouns that explorers tend to use. That instead of saying, you did this to me, my life is ruined, it tends to be more of a we, our lives blew up in 2020. We have worked really hard to get through to the other side. That it's the us, the we, rather than the he did this, he ruined me. I love that.
As do I. It's a critical distinction.
If you look at couples who come back as alum couples a lot of times, and even group leaders, they're in this state where they really have such compassion and want to give that hand up. And that's part of what has made their lives have so much more meaning.
Confidentiality and all that is really critical to us, but I almost wish we could do before and after videos of like showing what some of these couples look like coming into EMS weekend and just how, angry and broken and self-focused they were. And then seeing this couple on the other side of the journey and like, my goodness, it's like, they're different people.
What are the main variables that will have someone choose whether or not to become an explorer?
Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. I do think there's a place where you just have to be sick and tired of being sick and tired, as they say in 12-step work. And you're going, I don't care. I'm going to go for it. You have to be willing to take a leap. It's a risk and do the work. People who are explorers, they are not lazy. They are doing the work.
And to your other point, doing the work to some extent in community too, not trying to do it all by themselves. That they're staying in touch with others and if they're, I think faith can be a big component of this too, that they're, tied into God and God's will for their life, or people may have a conception of another kind of higher power, but where it's not just about them.
Right. So one of the things I've been studying lately is how people develop character and integrity and morals. And those are created in the context of community, of groups. And you can't read and change who you are, how you look at things. You change by being a part of a community that sets that standard, but also helps you carry the load for the change. And that's a huge piece of community. I mean, I can tell you right now, the thing that's kept me clean and sober for the last 37 years, 38 years, has been my community that I meet with. And apart from them, I don't think there's any way I would have survived.
That is so well said. Because we could find community in a community of sufferers. Like if that's what we're looking for, we can find it. They're out there. You could probably even find a community of builders. Not sure, it'd probably be a small group. They wouldn't want to show up because they don't want to have to go. But definitely we can find community with sufferers. And it's like, we want the community to be with the explorers, people that are actively trying to move through this.
I think sometimes what passes for community among the sufferers and things like that is more of a kind of almost a leper colony kind of mentality where they're just kind of like, they're bonding on their own victimhood or something, and then just kind of like letting, in essence, kind of re-traumatize each other,
Right.
And I even worry about that sometimes, like, on the AR message boards, you can usually see the sufferers coming out because they're 7 years in, 8 years in, and they're still kind of talking about the same sound bites, it's like they're doing their list of grievances almost like an oral history of, that I'm kind of going to say the story of my suffering again today. But it's not, a kind of community that they need. It's more of a co-enabling of staying stuck.
Yeah, maybe we should make everybody have to write 5 positive comments for every negative one. That's going to be a community requirement. You write 5 ways you're growing before you can complain about the one thing.
Are people predispositioned to be on one of these 3 paths?
Yes, they are. I'm going to go back to what I was saying. Oftentimes, how you were raised can be an influence. What was modeled in the schemas, it's called schemas, the strategies you developed to survive in life. So those can be limiting factors. I think that hedonic set point, if you naturally see the glass half empty, you're going to have to be around other people who can gain a different perspective. I know that circumstances, some people may think it's the circumstances that set whether they're going to be the builder, whether they're going to be, the sufferer, but it's not. Only 10% of this is actually circumstances. That's really clear in the research. So it's not your circumstances. It's far more who you're surrounding yourself with, the community you're a part of.
One of my favorite quotes is from Carl Jung, who says, I'm not what happened to me, I'm what I choose to become. And I wish I could almost embroider that on the pillows of some of the dear men and women that I work with that they're sleeping on. And to answer your question, Candace, too, I think trauma is formative trauma is a big piece, and why some people get more stuck in the suffering stage than others and everything, and working through the, whatever formative trauma they dealt with.
And they have to have the courage to ultimately face it. I mean, again, you're not stuck, but if you don't do the work to address it, then you'll stay stuck.
Yep.
If I come to you, if I'm at an EMS weekend or I am there in your office and it's very clear that I'm a sufferer, what can you do to try to entice me to choose a different path?
To me, one of the things I love so much about the EMS weekend is the context itself, I think, changes. That sometimes people don't get a glimpse about just kind of how miserable and isolated they let themselves become until they see others, trying to do something about it, or they see someone else who's kind of, sufferers will sometimes see another sufferer and be like, and yeah. But I think sometimes just the group context itself, enough of breaking out of that isolation. And yeah, I mean, I will definitely try to come up on a sufferer very compassionately and try to help them, to me, it's not just like, giving a few little tips for change this or change, to me, the whole AR approach is basically selling a whole paradigm shift. It's like we have to basically deconstruct the whole edifice of how we've been living and how and some people, like we've been talking about, are pretty tenaciously clinging to that. So, I think I know how you're going to answer this. So Rick's a little more confrontational in his approach than I am, and it works.
It was the way I was trained years ago. But I always tell the story, Kansas City MS, where a lady was definitely a sufferer and talking about how for 36 years she had given her husband presents and he had done all of this, and all he had ever done in 36 years was give her one rosary. And it was just went on and on for about 10 to 15 minutes. And I was like, holy smoly. So every time I crossed paths with her over the weekend, I'd go, for 36 years. And I just kept saying that all the way through the weekend. Well, on Sunday, she got really mad for some reason. And she said, why do you keep doing that? You're trying to hurt my feelings. I said, no. I said, I don't want you to be a victim. I don't want you to be that sufferer. If you had said for 36 years, he did all of I did this, he did nothing. And you know what I did? I sat there and I rebuilt my life, and I sat there and I went to school. And if you were telling a hero story, I'd be fine. But I'm going to give you a really hard time as long as you keep telling a victim story.
If I recognize this in myself, that I'm a sufferer or a builder and I want to be an explorer, what are some practical steps I can take?
One of the places I usually start, going back to something I was talking about earlier, was just getting them to kind of acknowledge the advantages of staying stuck, or at least the perceived advantages of what do you think this has served you, and kind of and generally trying to help them to deconstruct that and say that maybe this really isn't working the way I thought it was, or maybe what I thought I was wanting to return to isn't really that great of a place to go back to.
Yeah, another thing is looking at what's the secondary gain. Another one is looking at what are the lies they believe, and also being able to kind of say, really, where do you find that? Or where did that belief come from? That's another way.
Oftentimes getting into the weeds of just the, what's building the paradigm that they're living by. It's just, it's a whole combination of things. And sometimes you have to deprogram some of that family programming that you're talking about. You have to, and to me, one of the things I like to go after is where is some of the self-defeating behavior coming from? And a person who in essence doesn't believe they're lovable or believe they're worthy of better things is likely to just kind of accept the lot of this is who I am. And so, a lot of the AR work really has to be done at the level of identity.
And the other piece too is this is where community comes in also. But I think about the times I've made significant change. I met somebody who was able to do things, who was living differently. And in my head went, I want what they've got. Mm-hmm. And there was this whole thing of, I want that. And it was that seeing that there was another possibility from what I had that motivated me to begin to do the work to try to get what they had.
Totally. And just breaking the secrecy that surrounds the shame, that if we can put it into the light so that it can become the light, it's amazing how much that really works. That when you have this horrible story you feel like you've been holding all your life, and you believe the sky's going to fall down on you if you tell somebody, you tell it in a group and you get loved on for it, and supported for it. It's amazing what that starts doing to break the hold that old shame and secrecy has.
Who's the psychologist that says you have to begin to see the absurdity of it? I'm trying to read, is it Camus? Well, maybe it's philosopher. But anyway, I think it's true. When you can kind of see the absurdity of the way you were and laugh at it, when I hear that laughter, I know we just turned the corner.
Yep. And I think that's a huge piece of it too, that being able to laugh at ourselves and just kind of that's part of, to me, that, unconditional love is accepting my imperfection and even being able to celebrate my imperfection and laugh at my imperfection. That that to me is that we're trying to become those kind of holy fools where we can just kind of accept all that. And strangely, only when I accept that do I ever have the real means to change it. That's the only thing that kind of breaks the shackles of it is, being able to kind of to see it like that.
And sometimes even self-forgiveness. I heard somebody give this example once. What would you do if every time you did something, there was somebody that was criticizing what you did, and telling you that that was stupid and you were dumb and how in the world didn't you know, and on and on and on. And, as they were talking to me, I said, well, I sure as heck would, not feel good about me. I'd be scared to do anything in front of them. I don't want to be judged. And then the person said, yeah, and that's what you're doing to yourself all the time. You've got this inner critic, and every time you do something, it's telling you how lousy you were and, what that blah, blah, blah. And he said, until you forgive yourself and shut that critic up, you're going to have trouble changing. You bet. And for some, that internal critic is almost more like a Greek chorus. Every insult, every demeaning thing they ever heard, they hear those voices just bombarding them all the time. And changing the script.
Rick, when you mentioned community, it made me think of our online courses, that when you join in one of our online courses, the MS Online, Hope for Healing, Harboring Hope, that you have a group leader who has gone before you and is able to role model what that life looks like on the other side and give you some hope. Or most certainly, if you attend an EMS weekend, you're in a room filled with experts, plus fair recovery staff who have all gone through this firsthand and come out the other side. Yeah, and it's interesting how just being a part, even though you're in an anonymous community, how all of the scores, depression, anxiety, PTSD, over that 3-month period dropped significantly, not because of therapy, but because that community shows you how to be different. And that's what begins that transformative process.
Rick and I are there every month, and I know one of the things that keeps me coming back is my friends and coworkers and the wonderful people we get to work with. There's something incredibly liberating about being around honest, broken people, that I don't have to pretend anything. I get to be me, and I get to be loved on for being me, even despite all my flaws and all of that. And there's something just incredibly liberating about an environment like that where we're just not hiding anymore. With our 3 paths, the sufferer, the builder, and the explorer, which do you tend to see most often?
Actually, I think I get to see the explorer more than the rebuilder or the sufferer, but I also believe that's largely because of the way we do it. So many of our people are coming out of having done some work around this and coming in through EMS or through one of the groups or something. Yeah, I see a lot of explorers too. And speaking for myself, I think it's not always kind of like, I'm one or the other. Oftentimes, there are almost stages we can go through. I think I honestly went through all 3 stages, and almost like kind of Kubler-Ross's, stages of grief or something. I think we see a lot of people who may stay stuck in the sufferer role for a while, may kind of go on to a builder role, or, and then eventually kind of transcend to the explorer role. But I don't think one is necessarily a exclusive membership that you can't kind of change to to another struggle or another task with it. As I look at my own recovery, there's the first stage, I was definitely the sufferer, feeling like I would never be forgiven, I was always going to be punished, and I was playing the victim. And then there was the second place, and now it works back and forth, you're right, where I was scared to death of losing my family, losing my marriage, losing my kids. And as long as my biggest fear is what I'm going to lose and what it's going to cost me, I will always be in the rebuilder, trying to recapture so that I don't lose all of that. It wasn't until I got beyond the fear of losing things, and it became the fear of not changing, the fear of not growing, regardless of what it cost me. Until I got there, I couldn't be the explorer. Before we close today, do you find that faith plays a role in which of these paths people tend to take? It did for me, only in the sense that being able to find something higher in terms of another way of being. What it provided was another meaning and purpose that I didn't have prior to. So I think it provided for me that whole thing of a way of being healed, but it also a way of treating people. And it taught me how to love. And to me, that was a huge piece that I never had. I just was concerned with whether people loved me. And being able to learn how to love others was huge. And I would say that too, like, if there are people who have not, do not ascribe to a particular faith construct or haven't, found God yet or whatever, that can work for them too, in a sense that like if they, like Rick's saying, find something higher, that it's not just, maybe their higher
view as love or hope or something, but like something that kind of breaks them beyond just themselves. Sometimes when I'm working with somebody who's, more of the agnostic, atheistic kind of flavor, one of the things I sometimes explore with them is just what their worldview is like. Do they believe that that inherently the world's just a cruel, capricious place where we go through a certain amount of suffering and then go to our inevitable death? Or do you believe that something greater is moving? Do you believe in love? Do you believe, in the, whatever, like these more noble kinds of things? And it's amazing even kind of like what the philosophical worldview that people are bringing in, what that does for recovery, because some people they're defeated before they even get out of the gates because they're kind of like, what's the point? They don't even want to try.
I absolutely relate to that. I remember thinking, this cannot have been the master plan for my life to be ruined at the time I was 42. I thought, this cannot be it. This cannot be how it's going to go down. Something greater has to be on the other side of this. So I do feel like believing in something greater and bigger did play a role in that for me. I want to thank you both so much for being here today. What an excellent discussion. Love the whole idea of just that there are three paths. Like to me, when I learned about this, just realizing that we have that agency to learn which path we're on and then perhaps even choose something different, found that to be a very comforting thought. I want to thank you both for being here today.
I think choose is the key word there. That would, it's a great,
Absolutely.
great ending word.